of people said that they preferred the older intro. One of these people being this crazy dude here, making all the noise.
Now we just realize.
Morning, Viva.
Hold on.
No, we got.
Okay, hold on. There we go.
Oh, we got Viva on the road.
10 to 2, people. 10 to 2.
He's on the run.
Oh, he probably is because he's in Trudeau country, folks.
Yeah, get out of Canada, quick, leave.
We've entered Trudeau province too. Check it out. This is what Ontario looks like. Green, this is what Canada looks like. You see the orange cones on the side of the road? Everywhere. It's the land of the orange cone.
Oh, Canada.
Oh, Canada.
What are they there for? Is there construction?
Money.
No, I think they're. I think they're. Well, so the interesting story is who has the contracts for the rental of these cones, because the government doesn't own them. So they rent them out for like $1.50 a day a cone. I think they're doing some road work, so it looks like they're on both sides, but it's endless. How's everybody else doing?
All right. So, David, while we have you, have you followed the Danny Masterson case?
Not at all, but I know that he got convicted of a form of sexual assault.
Yes, I think 2 counts of the R word, and one was hung, I think, or I think they got him out of 2 out of 3 counts, which is great because the previous trial, I believe, was a mistrial, hung jury, whatever.
It was.
So a lot of people, from what I understand from the brief Scientology community feedback, they really thought that he was going to get off and the jury is going to either hang again or there'd be a mistrial, partly because of shenanigans from the Church of Scientology themselves. Like,
well, the problem is, unless you follow these trials at the time they occur, you never really know what to believe. Like, in as much as people would have thought a conviction in Zachariah Anderson's case was an indication of guilt, but we live in a world now where, like, unless you've watched it with your own eyes when it happened, you don't know what to believe based on reporting afterwards. But I don't know enough of the facts about this to even know if it was an obvious case or if it's a purported injustice.
I'm not sure, but I do know that one of the issues that came up, because I did a short on it, was the lawyer, one of the Scientology lawyers, so not Masterson's lawyers, but one of the lawyers who represents the church, I guess a corporate lawyer, whatever she would be, was complaining about the treatment of Scientology. So this is like literally a case against Masterson and against Scientology at the same time. And when she revealed or was talking about it, she sent a link, and that link was to a trove of discovery for that the defense was supposed to have, but not Scientology.
Oh,
and
really?
Yeah, and then that's a giant concern. Like, the DA's office is like, wait, why do you have all this stuff? And from what I understand, it may be doctrine within the church that they have to turn everything over to the church. It's some pretty creepy stuff.
I did hear about that, actually. Yeah.
What were the details of that? That's information that ought to have been disclosed to the defendants.
No, it was disclosed to the defense and then shared beyond the defense to the church itself.
Oh, and that's to support the idea of what the reprisals of the Church of Scientology against the victims or the accusers?
I don't know what Scientology would want to do with discovery for the defense, and I would never want to make any claim whatsoever. I have no idea, but I don't think they're supposed to have it.
Well, this is the problem. That discovery was handed over to Scientology. It was accidentally revealed much in the same way that the Alex Jones debacle happened. We shared a link and then somebody found an email and oops, you're not supposed to have this. The problem is that this was done in the criminal trial where Scientology was not a party. Scientology was a party to the civil suit. So it doesn't make sense for them to have discovery in the criminal case.
One can not presume but infer potential nefarious intentions or motivations. That's interesting. So but he was convicted on 2 of the 3 counts. Has he been sentenced yet?
No, I think he faces up to 50 years. Either way, it's a very bad day for him. So I don't know.
I don't know if the internet has gone apparently AT&T internet in Canada is also not so good. So I think you might be losing me now.
All right. Well, we hear you fine. So I will jump to Steve of Southern Law, who is always the quiet one. What cases have you been looking at recently?
Well, the update that I did this morning was on the ones that have been in the news. Lori Vallow's motion for a new trial, and of course, what's going on with Darrell Brooks, and then Taylor Shabusiness, who has a great name for a defendant, but yet she's also pure evil, it appears, and more restrained now. She can't attack her lawyer as easily as she could, but she's moved to dismiss one of her assault charge on the basis that if you kill the person first and chop them up into pieces, they are no longer eligible to be considered the kind of victim for the kind of assault that allegedly occurred. So props to her legal team for saying, look, we will go there. We will go there. We're not going to get choked out by our client. We will make the arguments that we can make. So, and then of course we talked about the 1 billion volt third rail of changing history in terms of names and statues and things. So whether you choose to get into that later, I'll leave to how far you want the rage index to go.
Oh yes. What is the name of the installation formerly known as Fort Bragg?
Yeah, so I'm here in North Carolina near what was yesterday Fort Bragg and what is today Fort Liberty. And it's one of the bases that was renamed because the name was associated with a Confederate general. And the other bases have been or are being renamed to other people who've served with a great level of distinction, like Fort Benning, which is where Airborne School and other things are, got changed to Fort Moore to celebrate Hal Moore. I get that. Fort Bragg was changed to Fort Liberty. It's the only one that wasn't changed to a person's name. And the commission there said, we got so many great people here. How can we pick just one? Okay, so these other forts only have one brave person. It just seemed like a cop-out to me. I think it's kind of a lame name because the 82nd has so many great heroes who've served there. So do other units there. Special Forces was based in, that's where you go to school if you want to be a Green Beret. There are lots of great people have come out of that. So I think they could have named it after somebody rather than Fort Liberty, which to me is just super a lame name for it, primarily because I don't think that's really any kind of value that's being pushed by our government. So it's fascinating they would name a fort that.
Well, it'd be like Fort Freedom of Speech.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly like that. So, there's one question about what do we feel about them changing the names of things? Because they also renamed every street down there that had anything to do with, the other side of the War of Northern Aggression, and which I get. And then, of course, in this state, we've had a lot of monument removal and stuff like there have been in some other southern states. And my perspective on that has managed, I think, enrage people who are for and against the monument removal situation. So,
well, then please share. We need to get the chat active.
Well, all right. So everybody who's ready to insult me, get on your keyboards. Here it comes. So, in North Carolina, one of the things that we have had, which I'm from Virginia, you got a lot of that up there too, is a lot of monuments dedicated to the Confederacy. And I grew up way out in the country, so I get that. I'm also, a history buff, a war buff. I've read a lot about the tactics the North used and the South used in the war, all the people on all the sides. So I see these as historical figures. And my perspective on it is not necessarily the same as someone else who would look at these things. But one of the things that you would see as you go around North Carolina is a monument, say, of a Confederate soldier or whatever, in front of almost every courthouse. And what's that soldier got to do to be in front of that courthouse? I mean, what's that got to do with justice? And, I get it at battlefields and at certain places where you'd have monuments, but I feel like, there are people who could look at that as they enter the courthouse for what it stands for and say, am I going to get justice here? Why is that 3-year period of time when we came in second place, people from the South, in this war, not first, second, in a war that we needed to lose? Do we need to have a statue for that one little period of time be the statue in front of a courthouse? It's not a judge or anything like that. It's, a soldier or whatever. So I've always supported, since I've thought about it, moving those things out of that kind of context. Now, I'm not for erasing them. I think it's shallow-minded people who don't understand that you can have a lot to learn by studying the people who were involved in this conflict from the North and from the South. Again, for anybody who's not, got synapses firing, we were on the people from the South. We were on the wrong side of that war. Okay, we needed to lose it. That's my opinion on that. But it doesn't make the military side of the history uninteresting to me. A lot of tactics developed there, a lot of things that went on from the North and the South. So I like the history of it, but I think there's a time and place for everything. And I think they let this boil up until it was taken advantage of by people who really want to tear down a greater segment of society than just whether these monuments are appropriate in front of a courthouse. They want to do damage to society in general with all the riots and things like this. So, I'm coming to tear down this statue, but while I'm here, I'm going to smash all your stores and burn things and threaten people. That is what we saw in Raleigh. I will certainly say that.
They renamed Fort Bragg because of the purported offensive nature of the historical figure after which it was named.
Yes.
Correct. And other forts too.
You know, it's amazing. Like in law, the stability of contracts is one of the reasons for which people can't willy-nilly change their names. And yet, when it comes to street names and things that have been around for decades, where you have maps dedicated to it, business cards, all this other stuff, the stability of contracts takes second place to political correctness of the era. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, one of the things that was interesting to me, being from the South and then being posted at Fort Bragg, where soldiers come from all over, right? And especially when they're headed into 82nd, is talking to people from all over and joking with them and stuff, and realizing that some of the point of this was to create a reconciliation between the two parts of society that had been divided. And for example, one of the roads down there was named Mosby, and John Singleton Mosby, somebody who I know because he was educated in Nelson County, Virginia, which is where I'm from, and he developed or executed a lot of guerrilla and ranger style tactics that are still taught in the military today. I mean, he was on the wrong side. Absolutely was on the wrong side. The interesting thing about this guy is when the war was over, he became the campaign manager for Grant in Virginia and was a Republican against slavery and served in the federal government after that. But you have to have his name gone. So there is no place to understand how we were able to begin to reconcile as a nation when you do this. Having said that, I also understand that other people could see it differently, the connotations that these people have. But, obviously I have an affinity for the name Bragg because that's been in my family for over half a century. People way over that, people serving there. So I don't like it. And I think Liberty, so I saw one of your commenters said it sounds like a theme park. Yeah, why don't they name it Carowinds? I mean, you could just join it up with Carowinds. Just put a runway there. It's a dumb name. If they were going to change it, they should have named it after one of the many fine soldiers who served the cause of freedom from Fort Bragg.
Totally agree. Joe, welcome.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm going to ask the question I ask everybody else and probably get the same answer. Danny Masterson, have you been covering it?
No.
Of course.
I didn't know there was going to be homework. No one told me that.
I thought you were one of these lawyers who talks about stuff every day, and it was a pretty major case. So I don't know. I make weird assumptions. I apologize.
No, you don't have to apologize. But no, I have not been following that case. Yeah, but I'm aware of it. I didn't know there was anything that happened in the last week or two. I know
he was convicted.
Oh, little details like that.
That one kind of was a big one. I don't know. Convicted on 2 counts of 4-letter R word.
I thought everyone kind of realized he was going to get convicted. From the way everything was shaping up, it was looking pretty bad for Danny Masterson.
Right.
And yeah, look, it's a weird thing because he played obviously that character on that 70s show, which was a very, very popular character because. Character he played was awesome, but unfortunately the character and the individual behind the character are not always the same. So,
all right, really quickly though, before I know David's probably going to pop off a second anyway, there is a super chat in here for Viva. Hey Viva, when you say genitalia, is that a Jean Lajoie reference?
Yes, it most certainly is. Genitalia, E equals MC. If nobody's heard of Jean Lajoie from Longueuil, Montreal, like Quebec, it used to be funny. But I think Trump and COVID broke his brain based on his recent comedy. But
David?
Speaking of...
David?
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah, that guy. He was on a show called The League. He played a character named Taco.
That's right.
And he made so many videos. Brilliant comedian. I didn't know that he went woke. That's disappointing. He did some like COVID rap because he used to do the funny music, and some of the stuff I saw during COVID seemed to indicate a brain that had been broken. But he was on with that was Derek Comedy. That was another classic comedy stuff from the time.
But do you guys know what's going on in Canada? Have you followed the Pierre Poilievre dropping the nuclear of all political bombs on Justin Trudeau in a parliamentary debate?
Only because of you. I saw you tweet it out on Twitter, and no American knows anything about Canadian politics unless they follow Viva Frei. So
I was actually surprised at how few people in the replies when I posted it said, "Well, what's the big deal? I don't get what he said." But this is hilarious. There's a long-running rumor in Canadian politics, unconfirmed. It came from like a fake news story, or from a story in a fake news website called the Buffalo Chronicle in 2019, that Justin Trudeau allegedly had improper relations with a student at the high school that he was teaching at back in 98 to 2001, which is why he abruptly left mid-semester. He did abruptly leave mid-semester. Nobody really knows why. Conflicting explanations. This rumor really took root in 2019 when an article purported that there was discussions about an NDA with the student because it was a federal election and they didn't want the story breaking. Worth noting that in 2000, that's the time at which Justin Trudeau purportedly groped a reporter and apologized to her for it because she was covering a story for him and he didn't know she was a national reporter, and he apparently touched her in a way that she didn't like, but he doesn't remember as being inappropriate. But he immediately apologized, said, "If I knew you were a national reporter, I never would have done this." Same time period.
What?
So
What?
Go look.
How does that make it better? Oh, because you're a reporter, that's why I wanted to touch
Because you count. Because you count.
Because you have a voice. Because people will hear you.
But you look up the CBC article. His apology is a narcissist insult. He says, "We experience things differently, and I appreciate that she experienced it in a way that I didn't experience it. But I apologize to the reporter behind the groping claim." So this is at the same time period of this allegation, but it is an unsubstantiated, reported in this thing called the Buffalo Chronicle, a couple of other, fake news websites. But Justin Trudeau, so they're in a parliamentary debate, and Trudeau picks a fight that I guess he didn't think it was going to go there, says, "I can't exactly remember what the leader of the opposition did before getting into politics." And everyone starts laughing because I don't know what Pierre Poilievre did or did not do by way of work. And then in retort, Pierre Poilievre says, "And I'm having trouble remembering why Justin Trudeau left midterm from his high school teaching career." And everybody in Parliament was either guffawing or so. Yeah.
If you forgot, no, what he actually said is, "I was a teacher." He was bragging. Trudeau was bragging about his record that he has like more insight on this topic because he had been a teacher.
That's true.
And that's what made Poilievre's, I don't even know how to pronounce this guy's name.
Poilievre.
Yeah, okay. What he said. That's what made his response that much more biting. You're trying to bask in your record as a teacher when you left there, according to some people, in shame. So
it was mid-semester, and then in 2019, when they approached the headmaster for comment, the headmaster's email response is, he left on good terms. He just came to me and said he's thinking of going back to Montreal in a year or so he's leaving mid-semester while teaching. It makes no sense. And it was the news of the week in Canada. And so much so, I put out a video on YouTube. It got demonetized. The views are still there. It got like 110,000 views since last night. It's the highlight from my stream. But YouTube wants to demonetize it. They're very gung-ho to demonetize anything that is anti-Trudeau. Like you try to put up some of those videos of the police beating the protesters or Trudeau and some of his statements. They demonetize that. So I do question why and how that happens so often. But that's the big news out of Canada this week.
What about his suspected father?
That's interesting. You see the pictures, and you know that the family were philanderers, and I say that just, it. I mean, his mother was a known philanderer, as was his father. And if you look at pictures, man, he looks more like Castro than he does like Pierre Elliott. That's for sure. But
a lot more like
uncanny. And then that picture of Margaret, what's her name? Margaret. No, yeah, that's right. Fidel holding up baby Justin, looking at him with admiration. I mean, it might have just been a convenient photo of a man who loved children and loved tyrannizing a population. But we'll never know unless we get some.
Well, they have something in common. I mean, right?
The meme now is not only does he look like his natural father, but he kills countries in the same way his father did, his birth father. But that's also an unsubstantiated rumor. The other one, it's unsubstantiated. But if he weren't such a groping misogynist inappropriate blackface wearing person in the first place, maybe people would have a tougher time believing what might just be a nasty rumor. Who knows?
Yeah, he likes China. Maybe I don't know which he likes better, Castro or China. He's kind of been, giving praise to both throughout time.
When Fidel died, he was singing his praises.
Yeah, he was. All right, I'm going to jump to Chandler, who's not said much at all this stream. What are you covering right now? What's happening?
That's a good question. Well, I have been covering the Sarah Boone trial a little bit.
Oh.
I did a stream last week, and it's funny because Sarah Boone, you mentioned Shabusiness, and Sarah Boone and Taylor Shabusiness, two women who both murdered their boyfriends. Their trials both start on the same date, July 26th. So there's kind of a conflict there with, which trial does one cover. And that's a really crazy case. So I had MLS Law on, and we watched the Axon footage from the morning that they discovered the body. And I think next Wednesday we're going to go over her interview. So that should be interesting. Oh,
David or Viva, I did mute your mic just so we didn't have the background road noise. So just so you know to unmute yourself when you come back in. I'm
going to mention to you, Eric. I mean,
yes.
That she just referenced MLS, and I'm going to recommend. He's a great attorney, great guy, great content creator. I recommend him to everyone watching. We should try getting him on a panel here. I'm sure he'd love to join, and he's an entertaining listen. So
please reach out. I mean, I'm wide open. I'm trying to find different people, change up different people, etc. all the time. So I'm more than happy to have anybody.
If I can plug David further, I mean, he covered the Zachariah Anderson case concurrently while I was on panel with Legal Vices, with Jeff, and with Hayden, Aussie Overlord. So I didn't actually know that David was covering the trial at the same time until he did an interview with Solomon Anderson. I think he did one of the first interviews with Solomon. And I got confused because I didn't know that he had covered the trial. And I was like, why is he interviewing this guy? But he has become a really great friend. He has come on, for both of my streams, the two streams that I have done in all of my YouTube career so far. And he's really smart. So MLS Law he's a great attorney. He's really intelligent, and I really enjoyed his appearance on your show, Joe.
Hold on.
Was the alleged murderer's name Shabiz?
Stage name.
The murderer was that name, or the victim was that name?
The murderer is Taylor Shabusiness.
Yeah.
Shabusiness. Okay, going about Shabusiness.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to leave Sarah Boone too much because somebody asked that I have my handwriting expert look at one of her letters, and I would love to know more because I don't know anything about the case, but I guess she writes
a lot.
Unhinged letters or
I can get into it. I can certainly get into it. Yeah, I mean, Bruce Rivers has been covering a lot of her letters, and I know that Peter Tragos has talked about her a lot as well. She keeps writing letters to the judge, and there's this question that comes up: does she have effective counsel or not? She claims that, and she's very good at advocating for herself. I will say this. She has impeccable handwriting, as I'm sure you've noticed. And she writes all of these letters claiming that her attorney has not met with her, he hasn't spoken to her, he won't pick up her calls. And if true, that could be a problem. But the thing is that this is her 7th attorney. And you have to wonder why the previous 6 attorneys are no longer with her. And so, my mic is all the way over here, I didn't realize.
You don't have to wonder why. You don't have to wonder why.
No,
if someone embraces a name of Shabusiness, they're already telling you before they walk in. Oh, that was Sarah Boone?
Wrong case. No, this is the other girl who murdered her boyfriend. The different girl.
This is the one who put the dude in a suitcase and left him there overnight.
Oh, that's right, suitcase Sarah Boone.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
No, wasn't she
unintentionally?
No, her trial keeps getting delayed.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So the thing is that her trial keeps getting delayed because they want to use the battered spouse defense for Sarah Boone. Her attorney wants to bring on an expert, and they can't find an expert willing to testify. And so that's why they have to keep pushing off the trial date.
Is that because he was found in a suitcase? Like maybe the battered spouse aspect can go, there could be an extended period of time, but if you keep going and a person winds up in pieces inside of a suitcase that might start to take away from the battered aspect? I'm curious.
Well, so here's the thing. First of all, to correct. So I think it's easy to get these cases mixed up. So Taylor Schabusiness murdered her boyfriend, cut him into pieces. And then Sarah Boone zipped her boyfriend into a suitcase in a game of hide and seek that they were playing.
Wait, what?
So I know. So these are two 42-year-old people. They've been in a relationship for 3 years. It's a relationship that is fraught with domestic violence allegations. She's constantly calling the police on him. She has charges against her for battery strangulation. And the police have a hard time determining who is the aggressor. He ends up being charged, so they have charges from 2018. I've read the police report from July, where there are 2 different accounts, where, in my opinion, she should have gone to jail for attempted murder because there was evidence that he had been strangled. But she came up with this other theory of, like, oh, this happened instead. I think that his report was more credible. The problem is that this guy winds up dead. So they're playing hide and seek. And
how do you fit him in a suitcase? I mean, you see, like
he's a little guy. He's not very big.
So.
He was like 5'4", maybe, something like that. And she said that they were drinking, and you don't know what really happened because the guy can't really, speak to what happened. But her testimony is that she zipped him up in the suitcase, and she was, playing with him, making him squirm a little bit, but that she left a little room for him to like put his finger, like unzip the thing and get out. He's in there for 11 hours and dies by positional asphyxia.
Yeah.
And basically her claim was, oh, well, I just, went up to bed and I fell asleep and I forgot that he was in the suitcase.
So essentially he died the way people do on a crucifix, where essentially it just asphyxiates because of the angle of the neck, etc.
So it's something where your chest is compressed to the point where you can't draw breath increasingly over time. And she had flipped the suitcase over. There was some allegation. It's not clear, but a neighbor heard a loud thud going down the stairs. There's this idea that perhaps the suitcase had been thrown down the stairs with him in it. We don't really know because there were bruises, there were, contusions and abrasions, but it's not totally clear what happened. What we do know is that, she comes out of this and says, oh, it wasn't intentional. But then there are videos on her phone where she's mocking him and he's calling her name, asking to be let out of the suitcase, and she's telling him, that's what you get for cheating on me, that's what you get, that's how you make me feel when you choke me or do this or do that to me. It's very clear that he's saying, I can't breathe, let me out. And she's plastered, like she's had like a bottle of wine, you can hear it in her voice, and she won't let him out, and she doesn't let him out, and he dies.
What's also interesting is when she finds him the next morning or whatever, she calls her ex-husband who comes over, and it's the ex-husband who says, she goes, what should we do? And he goes, we should call the police and an ambulance. Yeah. It's
very, very weird. And
he said something like, I
want
nothing to do with this too. Right. Mm-hmm. Like he's backs out. So it's like,
well, he says that he went over there. And he actually went into the apartment. The problem is, like, they have shared custody of a child. They have a small child together. And I guess it was her day for visitation. And so I don't know how he ends up there or why, but it's very weird when you watch the Axon footage and you watch them talking to the ex-husband. Like, it's...
I'm gonna have to look this up. Okay, I just heard
it's a really complex case. And Eric, I know that you have done you've done behavioral analysis of her body language, right? And I think in the interview.
I did not. The behavior panel did. I recommend a lot of people's channels, so I believe the behavior panel did the coverage of it.
I don't need to be a behavioral analyst to tell you that this is a sick, disgusting, disturbing, depraved heart. When I was in law school, I always wondered, what the heck does the depraved heart mean? And this is it. This is it. How can someone be so... Wow, that is so disturbing.
She's very concerned with herself. She cares about herself only. And she talks about, oh, there's going to be a funeral and I'm afraid for my safety because his family has always said that this would happen, that I would kill him.
That's why she's afraid for her
safety? She says his family all call me the blue-eyed white dragon and they hate my guts.
And doesn't she say something like, his family always said I'd kill him?
Yep. Yeah, she said they've always said that, and I had to pull his sister off of me because she attacked me one time, and they clearly didn't like her. They were together for 3 years.
From the self-lawyering aspect, when I watched her interview, she seems to think if she harps on, I didn't intend to kill him, it was an accident, she's going to float out of there without realizing that that what she got charged with, of course, was second degree, and it's reckless indifference. So finally the officer's like, it's okay. You left him in a suitcase while he was saying he was going to die if you left him in there, and you left him in there, and that's reckless indifference. Why don't you just turn around and we'll just scoot you on into the jail? And then she starts her letter writing campaign. I feel like, as probably you do, Chandler, these are all personally addressed to me, because she writes these letters to the whole world. And for people covering them, it is fascinating to see what she has. She'd love to be on your panel, Eric, if she could get a Zoom connection out of jail. I'm sure.
Well, hey,
she wants
Joe
to tell everybody her story.
Joe Exotic seems to be going on everybody's streams, so maybe there's a way. I'll have to look into that.
I was not aware that Joe Exotic was doing that. Whose channels?
Several, but he blocked me. He's very upset.
Oh, because you had on Carol.
Well, I don't think he was worried about Carol, but when I had
Carol on, I missed that.
Yeah, I had Carol.
He didn't just have Carol on. He didn't just have Carol on. He had Nick Rekieta trolling him in the chat while he had Carol on, and it's like, Carol is basically saying something like, ever since I lost my husband, and Nick is sending these super chats out
Where
there.
did you stick her in the freezer or in the
No. He's like, where did you lose him? Did you check inside the tiger?
Well, Eric, you better be careful, or she's going to send a tiger after. Or no, Joe Exotic is going to send one of his tigers after you. They've been used to all of that, what the Walmart expired hot dog meat and everything. You'll probably be a lot tastier. So just watch yourself.
The problem is he didn't care for them, and they're not healthy. But no, I had Jeff Lowe also and Garrettson on recently, and it's on my channel. It's under my name, Eric Hunley. It's a separate channel, but anyway, had them on, and what they said not only about Joe Exotic, but also Eric Good, the producer behind Tiger King, and what he's up to. And there were claims about a lawyer. I think it was a good stream when somebody threatened to sue me within a half an hour of it being over. And it was a lawyer. So
you did good. Wow. You did great.
You did
I love it. So I have to check that out.
Anyway, but yeah, that was I don't even know how we got into that, but that is an interesting scenario. I know that Joe keeps calling in. As a matter of fact, any of you, if you want to have Joe Exotic on, I think it's $185 or something. He's literally, you get the money to him and he'll somehow call out, and you get to have him on the show, and it'll say, this is a fugitive, or this is an inmate at such and such correctional facility. Every 5 minutes it'll pop in, but it's very interesting. He is running for president, folks. So
nice.
Yeah,
I remember. Yeah. Exotic 24.
Eugene B. Debs, I think it was, also ran from prison, but he was just a socialist, not necessarily a very odd individual.
I don't know if I
elected, what do we call him? President Exotic?
President Exotic. I hope he teams up with Shabusiness. It's like Exotic Shabusiness 24. That would be, my God. That's the perfect ticket right there.
I love it.
I saw a video briefly that went by. I don't know if anybody you covered it, but it was very disturbing. It was like just a clip that they put on YouTube where a cop was talking to this female who was sitting there, and she was like, so I don't get my car back? And he's like, no, your car's totaled. Well, how am I going to get to school? You're not going to school. You just killed 2 people. You're not going. And it was the most unsettling. I don't know if any of you've seen that or not, or know anything about the case. Cool. Fill me in. What is that case? Because I saw that video and I was like, wow, this is the face of sociopathic entitlement if I've ever seen one.
So it happened in, I can't pronounce it, Peoria, Illinois?
Peoria.
Okay. Stephanie Melgoza, who I believe was 24 at the time, she was set to graduate from, I want to say Bradley University. I think that's the name of the school. She mows down 2 people while she's driving from one bar to the next. And it's such a gruesome and grisly crime scene that I believe there was a severed limb just laying on the road. I mean, absolutely terrible. And she's very concerned about her car, so she's the one who calls 911. The police come, and she's obviously plastered. They do, sobriety tests with her. She's like joking around, totally unconcerned. And they're like, you just killed 2 people. And she goes, no, I didn't. They're like, somebody just came out of nowhere. It was just one person, that like went through my windshield. And, you know, she's like, trust me, if I killed 2 people, I'd be crying right now. So they take her to the hospital because she has some glass in her foot. She's totally unconcerned, and she's talking about how I'm going to go to Vegas for my birthday because it's going to be my graduation and I'm going to get 2 Long Island iced teas. And the officer goes, I think you'd have enough of drinking by now. And she goes, no, it's Vegas. There are no limits in Vegas. Then she starts singing a little song to herself while the officer's doing the paperwork. She knows she's killed 2 people, but she's absolutely unconcerned with this fact. And, this was such a problem that, you know, it ended up being there were all of these people at her school who had to protest her graduation. They were so disgusted by this. And so somebody I remember in the comments goes, you know, oh, well, she probably has a head injury. That's probably why she's acting like this. No, Stephanie Malgoza is just a very selfish individual who blames the whole thing on alcohol. Now she's being sentenced to, God, I'm not exactly sure.
I think it's 14 years.
14 years.
14 years. Yeah.
And she's talking about how this is a lesson to everybody that alcohol is bad, basically. This is just, it's one of the most narcissistic individuals I think I've ever seen. And it was really appalling to watch. So it's a long crime video. I think she was just sentenced recently.
Wow.
It's pretty awful.
2 innocent people, a couple who were just walking down the street. I think the name of the bar was something like Full Throttle, which just makes it all the more morbid. Really sickening case. Awful.
All right.
She was sentenced on April 27th.
Yeah, but that clip keeps going around of her, you know, like, because she's talking about, like, oh, well, I have to go to school, I have to get my car, you know, oh, well, not tomorrow. And he's like, no, your car is a crime scene. You know, 2 people were murdered because of your car. And she's just like, well, can I get it Wednesday? Like, I have a class. I mean,
it's staggering. I mean, it was literally like nobody else in the world exists. That's why I was like, sociopathic entitlement. I mean,
absolutely.
Honestly, it's like I feel like the way she represented herself, she would hit 2 more people and then complain that they were making her late, you know, because the cars, you know, got knocked over or something. That's just insane. So Steve Gosney, what do you have going on right now?
Oh, all kinds of stuff. Actually, I all night last night. Chandler and I were talking about my new book, which is on death penalty debates, and we actually quit at 9 o'clock, and I watched Joe, Good Logic, talking. Joe, he was great. I'll tell you, that was a great show last night, Joe.
Thank you.
We only wanted to go an hour because we all wanted to watch What Is a Woman. I still haven't seen it yet in full. But we had a great time.
I watched the whole thing, and listening to your commentary was a joy, and I love it. I you know,
thank you.
You have a moral, and it's funny because it took me a little bit to tune into where you're coming from, but I really appreciate where you come from, Joe, and I really respect you.
Thank you.
And that was a great show. So he watched the entire What Is a Woman documentary, and he'd stop it. It was like an hour and a half in, and he's only 30 minutes into the movie because he's ranting and raving.
This is Joe.
Joe, Good Logic, over here in the corner. So I think, they're so that's what I did all night last night.
Thank you.
It. Yeah.
Wow, I gotta clip this. I gotta clip this.
I'm not an idle flatterer. I really did enjoy it. I thought it was a great show. So
thank you. So I actually started what you probably missed. I actually started by making a couple of points, and one of them is, you know, I don't look at trans. I don't look at this whole T issue as something that I'm angry at people who identify as trans for the most part. I think that most of them are victims. I think that.
You hit it out of the park. You were so right on the money about everything. I loved your commentary. I loved your perspective. It was compassionate and kind of grounded in common sense. And it was just wonderful watching it with you. So I felt like we watched a movie together last night.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, and then what I've been doing also is I've been doing a series of forensic science interviews. So this week, I did one on fingerprint analysis, and I had a fingerprint analyst on, and we talked about fingerprints and the science behind fingerprints. I had Chris Fabricant from the Innocence Project on, talking about junk science. And then tonight at 8 o'clock on Rumble, I'm going to be interviewing an expert on DNA. So basically, I've been going through the different forensic sciences on my spare time because I like to learn and I like to listen. And so we have conversations with people who are experts in these fields. So that's what I've been doing over on Rumble.
I hope you have somebody shred the polygraph.
Well, actually, you know, my closest friend, one of my closest friends, the godfather of my son, is a polygrapher for the Secret Service.
Well,
yes, we have interesting conversations. I will tell you that.
yes, it should be quite heated because you mentioned junk science and forensics, and I just it couldn't help myself.
Well, I will say that, you know, it's the polygraph is not admissible in any court that I'm aware
Correct.
of, right? However, what people don't realize is the statements that you make during a polygraph are admissible because they're statements against interest. So
Yeah.
if they extract the context of the statements come in. It's like, well, I can talk to this machine because it's not admissible. No, everything you're saying is admissible. It's just not in a context of a lie detector. So, and actually, there is some science behind it. It actually increases, from my understanding of the science, and I'm no expert on this by any means, is that it increases it from about a 50 to 55% to about an 80% detection. But a lot of that, it's not so much the machine.
That's a polygrapher.
It's the skill of the interrogator. And if you know, and I know what these guys go through to become a trained polygrapher and a trained questioner. And it's kind of like, I would never want to go toe to toe with one of those guys. It's like going toe to toe with somebody who is a trained marksman in a battlefield situation when I've never picked up a gun before, right? That's what you're doing when you go toe to toe with one of these.
With some of these guys, and I'm only telling you because I literally had, rest in peace. Was it Doug Kramer? I forgot his last name. No, Doug Williams on, and he is the guy who got it banished from courts. He testified in front of Congress. He wound up being arrested, served time because he taught people how to beat the polygraph, and thus proving in of itself the fact that they convicted him for teaching people how to beat something that is supposedly scientific, not really beatable. By the way, it's not attack of the shoe or whatever. I mean, people have been beating the polygraph for a long, long time.
Well, that's what a polygrapher was. I kept thinking Mormon. I'm like, I don't know what he's talking about.
Even at its best, it's 80%, which means that's a 20% error rate, which is so far off from any kind of scientific validity. But the fact is that the questioners, the skill of the questioners, the interrogators are so great that it's the machine is not what you're dealing with.
No, the machine is. He called it literally. The machine is a rubber hose. And I think that's a fair analogy. It is a tool to intimidate the person that you're speaking to. And the more they think it's that, the more, quote, effective it is. But it's interesting. Another thing that came up, and sorry to hijack, I just interviewed Aldert Frei, who is one of the top people in the world on deception. He's actually a scientist. He teaches out of England. He hates statement analysis and body language and different things. So let me get it straight. He is actually a scientist in a lab who does test these things. But I asked him about deception from the cops in questioning. And I learned, and I'm sure all of you already know this, but cops here can lie in order to get somebody to confess or whatever. You cannot lie in Europe and England. I did not know that.
Actually, I think that's a good thing because the problem is that the law enforcement becomes so accustomed that lying is okay in order to get the bad guy that then it becomes like, well, is it okay then to lie in court? I kind of have a problem with. I understand that there's techniques. It's a very slippery slope and a moral conundrum.
Can I ask you guys something while we're talking about this? Because as you guys were having this conversation, it made me just start thinking, like, how would I rank credibility on like 5 different things that we sort of been touching on here? How would you rank these 5 things as far as if you heard there was a determination by any of these 5 things, which would you trust most to least? Okay, so you have polygraphy, you have body language, you have jury finding, you have a court finding by a judge without a jury, and the 5th thing I would have is a police statement. If you heard from any of these 5, how would you rank as far as most likely that if just any statement is said, most likely to be accurate? If you have jury finding, court finding, police statement, polygraphy, body language, out of those 5, which would you guys think is the most likely that's going to be accurate, and which would you think is the least likely that's definitely accurate? You can rely, this is definitely accurate.
I think none of them are definitely accurate. My personal feeling would be the jury finding I would give the most weight to, barely, just because the amount of time and effort that was put forth by multiple people to come to the conclusion. Now, I'm not saying there's not a million problems, but that one, at least, I feel like there might have been some degree of time put into it. That's my opinion, and I'm probably way off. Nate, I want to hear from you. What would you find?
To be honest with you, I don't know. I was thinking about it because they all have issues. but I, I also want to answer the last question that we were talking about right before Joe asked this question. So with this question, to be honest with you, I'm not sure because each one has difficulties. It all depends on what's been presented. Like, if you're talking about a judge or jury, it's evidence and stuff that's been presented versus a cop statement, they tell you is generally not evidence. It is what it is. But I think when we talk about police lying to suspects, I think that's also contextualized because there's sometimes like undercover cops, for instance. Are you a cop? I think we'd all suggest that cop in that moment should lie to that suspect, right? But then we're talking about interrogations. There are some parts and times where police do lie, and to see if they can get the person to, like, for instance, if the person did something or was at a particular place, but you don't have absolute proof. You're like, well, we know you're at that place because so-and-so told you. And sometimes that would force the person to come forward and to give up more information.
You could frame it though, Nate. You can do it without lying. You can technically say, what if I told you somebody saw you there at 10?
Well,
we talked to a bunch of people and we think you were there, or, whatever. You can frame it in a very, very manipulative, crazy way without technically lying.
Well, I've taken the interview and interrogation course, and I've done interrogations, and the number one thing for anyone is what's known as rapport building. You want to have a relationship with the suspect that you're trying. So, for instance, there was one time a guy stole a bag, and he was a big Yankee fan. The guy had a Yankee cap. So the interrogation, I come in there with all Yankee stuff on, right?
Sure.
We're talking about Derek Jeter and stuff for the first couple of minutes, and then we go into the thing. But at that point, he's talking to me as I'm his friend. I even give him his rights. And he's like, "Hey," his lawyer comes and says, "Why'd you tell the guy everything?" He's like, "Because the guy just talked to me as a person. I'm buying this guy sodas and food and just having a conversation with him." And he told, and matter of fact, there's one on my channel where I interrogated the woman who was defrauding people for a cancer scam. So there's an interrogation where I interrogated a woman on my channel, and she admitted to having this cancer scam. So what I'm saying is that there can't really be a blanket rule, but I do think when you do lie to suspects, it is a slippery slope, because I have had suspects just tell me what I want to hear because of the situation. So, I have had suspects essentially lie about their own guilt, saying, "Hey, I'm guilty of this." And then I had to, when we looked into it, we're like, "Hey, this guy's obviously lying." But they were lying because they wanted to get out of that situation and not because they actually did it. And that's I think the piece that police officers have to be very, very, very careful of, because you're in a position of authority. When somebody's in that room and you're talking to that person, they are, it's a lot of people say, I wouldn't lie, or I wouldn't, can say that I did something I didn't do. But that's just BS, because I've seen it happen time and time and time again. And I think that's the issue. And I think people need to be educated on police procedures and saying, "Hey, if you didn't do something, no matter how long it takes, if they got you in there for 5 or 6 hours, continue to say the truth." Because if you're 6 hours in and you're just saying, "I'm so tired and don't want to do this," that's when things usually go south.
I thought you would say, don't say a damn thing other than "I want a lawyer" the second you talk to him.
Yes, that's what I tell everybody. I tell everybody, even if you're innocent, even if if one thing a lot of people don't realize too, if the cops say, "Hey, let's go talk downtown," or talk it, if they're talking to you, or if they read you your rights and say, "Hey, just as a formality, we're going to read you your rights," at that point in time, and you hear the words, "You have a right to an attorney," you should say, "I want my attorney," because anytime they read you your rights, you're not just some Joe Blow they're talking to. You're somebody who they think they maybe have to arrest, and they want to, and they're giving you those rights so they can, whatever you say, they can use in court.
I have one more question on that note, because I heard something from Bronca, and he was saying, and I never put this together, but on self-defense especially, you need to invoke your rights. That you don't even wait for them to read your rights, because your silence can be held against you. You have to say, I'm invoking my right to remain silent. I'm seeking a lawyer, because any time before that, according to him, when testifying, they can ask the cop and say, did he tell you he felt threatened? Nope, didn't say a word. Didn't have any problem at all.
It depends on the jurisdiction. Florida is actually pretty good on this, and we are more liberal in preventing comments on even pre-arrest silence. But most jurisdictions that follow, if that's a federal rule, are exactly what you're saying, is that even pre-arrest silence can be used against you, which seems ridiculous, but that is the case. And I will add another thing to what Nate was saying. You need to affirmatively evoke both your say, I wish to have a lawyer and I want to remain silent, and then you've got to stick to it. Because what happens is people think that there's going to be a lawyer parachuting in from the clouds and all of a sudden doing it. And then when they sit and they get hotboxed in a room for 5 hours and they're waiting for their lawyer, and the guy comes back in and says, hey man, just checking in. You want a glass of water or something? And they're like, hey, can I talk to you? Oh, do you want to wave now? Oh, and then they wave. I've seen that happen over and over again, because then they think, oh, you're my friend and you're to help me, because they think the lawyer's going to parachute in. No, you invoke and you you keep quiet, and you keep quiet. That means on the jail phones, to your cellmates, to your family members, to everybody but your lawyer. And the lawyer's not going to come parachuting in. If you're in trouble, you're in the soup, you invoke and you stick to it.
What about if they do offer you a drink? Can you say, yes, I'll take a drink?
Yes, but usually that's a way for them to interact with you, so that then you waive your invocation.
Yes. One thing I love, though, we used to call them Rikers phone calls. Whatever crime you can, because I'm out at the DA's office, you get the shit jobs at the beginning, and one of the shit jobs is listen to hours of people making phone calls. And I've heard people literally give up rapes, murder, with the worst possible crimes. Just listening to them on the phone, they will confess to, and they have a huge sign in front of the phone that says all phone calls are recorded, blah, 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 blah. And they still, so if you get arrested, unless you're talking to your lawyer on that phone, because we've had a couple of those where the guy happened to be talking to his lawyer, but gave it up anyway, that hurts their defense anyway, because the lawyers would come in and talk to you face to face. But even in those situations, they, do not talk to anyone on any phone in a police precinct, or because they are listening, and you don't want to be in a situation where we're playing your words against you, saying how you're guilty of the situation, you've done it, but you're going to say that you didn't do it. It happens all the time.
No, totally believe it. By the way, that's the same reason that reality television works, by the way. Everybody knows there's cameras following them around, but they get used to it and they forget about it. And then they start to slip into whatever their nature is, not to mention producers who are instigating stuff I covered in the Tiger King episode. And I also interviewed Javier Colon from Outlast about that, because I find it fascinating how people will forget. Like you just said, Nate, every sign says,
I forget all the time. I can't. It's like, oh my god, I can't believe I got my finger that deep up my own nose, like on camera. It was awful. Like, I have so many downfalls that I know one day that's gonna happen, that I'm just gonna forget I'm on camera, and all of a sudden everyone's gonna see that, like, the double life that I'm leading. That's the thing. If you are the same way all the time, and you don't, and
hard to slip.
I guess, you don't really need to worry about that. I mean, I guess if you're accused of a crime and you don't want people to know about that, but that's part. I actually think when someone actually is comfortable, that's when you're actually getting the real person. That's when you're getting whatever. I don't know.
Well, Nate, what Nate's talking about is one of the charges that still exist against Daryl Brooks is intimidation of a witness for Erica Patterson. And I found his phone call transcripts and went through those in a video. And there's one where he's now using code words. So it's not him. It's not me, Daryl. It's him. And it's not her. It's, she. And they're using these third person things. But then halfway through the call, he gets pissed off at her and he just abandons that. And instead of saying, well, you know, he might get mad about it, he's like, I will get my food. So he completely just loses the whole code word thing which was lame anyway, halfway through the phone call with her.
Yeah, code words don't work. Using your buddy's PIN doesn't work. You know, like, oh, nobody will get that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Those are the best when they try. So to those of you who don't know, in prison you have a PIN number that you use, and so they switch the PIN numbers and think that works. But then they forget there's cameras there, so we can see who's on the phone.
So those people and stupidity is a big part of our process.
Hey, somebody just put this in a chat. This would be good North Carolina case for Steve if you ever want to do a historic case. Duke Lacrosse.
Yeah, that was a terrible case, and I actually had some work with the DNA lab that did work in that case, not on that case, and it's been a topic of CLE down here, of course, because of the crooked DA and stuff. And when that happened, I had friends here who were like, "Oh, this smells really bad." I'm like, "Listen, man, the DA is not going to make this stuff up. Let's wait this thing through," because I felt like it was so unlikely. But of course, he was completely crooked, right? I mean, it was completely a fraudulent case against these people. And of course, what should have clued me in was when the Duke faculty got on board and started talking junk about the students that they wanted to slander, because they're always wrong. The Duke faculty always wants to pimp out some kind of wrong cause or whatever. So that should have been the clue. But yeah, Nifong was the DA's name. And I remember seeing his guitar on an auction site after he went down for all that. So,
and the sick thing is that the lie is on page 1 of your feed, and the retraction is on page 37.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you know what? I almost forgot. We got to give a shout out to the 1-year anniversary, which was yesterday, of the Johnny Depp verdict.
Wow.
How it was like, can you guys believe it's a year ago that thing happened?
Oh, wow. I still remember it. It's kind of like you remember where you were when the verdict was read, and I had so much trepidation.
Chandler, how did you feel when the verdict came down? But where were you at? What were you doing? And did you scream and yell like the rest of us?
So I was watching Legal Bites panel, and I remember I was like watching it on my phone in my living room, and I was sitting with my mom, and we were like holding hands, you know, we were just kind of hoping and praying. And I was really surprised because I think everybody was expecting for only one of the counts to go forward. And when all 3 counts were read in his favor, I was thrilled. I mean, I can't explain the feeling that I had about that, but it was moving. It was incredibly moving. That's just me. Everybody else.
No.
Well, I was screaming like a schoolgirl. I was like, I can't believe it. You guys know, this is crazy.
No, I was thrilled. Yeah.
Well, supposedly Nate's reaction got back to Johnny.
Yeah, really? That was wild. Yeah. He was like, I can't, because I just went crazy because there was no way. I was like, listen, we live in a woke world. Me Too's everywhere. The whole Me Too apparatus was all against Johnny. We saw the lies, and we're like shooting this thing every day. And I was like, they're going to screw him. And then when it came back, it was like, is this really happening? Is this, did he actually win? And I remember it was just crazy.
How do you know that Johnny Depp saw Nate's reaction?
Oh, because his friend, because we were on Legal Bites panel, his best friend Josh.
Mm-hmm. So
his best friend Josh was the one who sent it to him. But Josh, for everybody else, Josh just put up, because Josh was with Johnny Depp when the verdict went down, so he recorded it. So he just put on his Instagram for the 1-year anniversary Johnny Depp's reaction to the verdict being read. So
I remember we'll have to look that up. I remember him describing it and saying that Johnny kind of looked at him after, a while, and he just goes, "Did I win?" And I really loved that. That was my favorite thing. Josh Richmond, right? Yeah, Josh was awesome.
Yeah, Josh Richmond, yeah.
He went to Alita's wedding, I'm pretty sure, right?
Yeah, he was there.
Yeah,
you were there.
Yeah, Nate and I were both there. Yeah, that's right.
And so much has happened since then, and everything with Christopher Boozy. And I don't know if you know this, Nate, but that's how I met Joe and Eric, was because I was doing a fundraiser with my friends on Twitter for your campaign against Chris Boozy. And they came on with Ian to talk about it. And that's how we became Twitter friends. I don't know if you guys recall that, but it was a while back. We raised a lot of money for your, for your
wow.
Oh, it was a Spaces, Twitter Spaces.
Yeah, we did a Twitter space.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't see faces, so it just kind of was like.
No, but you guys added me, and it was really cool to have you on. You were talking a lot, and then Joe, you were late for your own show. And somebody came in and they were like, everybody's waiting for you. What are you doing? You know, which was pretty funny. But I was really happy to be a part of that because, you know, all the Chris Boozy stuff. I mean, that was like, we really got into that. That was really interesting.
Yeah, the Chris Boozy stuff.
Just so much has happened in the last year since Depp.
Speaking of that,
with all this.
Lady Colin Campbell just called him out in her latest video at 7:20, essentially implying that she's encouraging. Let me back up. He tweeted that Harry and Meghan need to sue Lady Colin Campbell to oblivion. And she has responded how much she wants this suit to happen. And those of you who may not be familiar with who she is a very litigious person, from what I understand, and very much enjoys lawsuits and very much has the means, if you will, to participate in lawfare, spelled the F-A-R-E way, not the way I did on this stream.
Could we call them frivolous?
I don't know that I would call her frivolous. She's an author. She writes about the royals and different things like that. People sue her over defamation. She has a legal team. So I don't know, you know, how it will shake out. But I just wanted to point that out if anybody was curious, because Christopher Boozy, I don't know what it is. He seems to have an inability to just shut up. He keeps going and going. I do have a couple super chats. I forgot about this one. It's been here, and this goes back a little bit. I had a friend in high school who was run over by a similar woman. She was walking home after soccer practice. It was rush hour, and the driver wanted to get home and just hit the gas and killed her, which is incredibly disturbing. And I don't know. I don't even know what goes into somebody's mind that in that one split second decision out of their entire lives, they're just going to say, I'm impatient, and that person's life no longer is relevant. And a second one, this one just came in from Let's Go Brandon, who is famous amongst the lawyers who drink. Steve, I know you're a serious man, but can you teach me how to give less than 0 ducks like you do? There could be a Bronca course as well.
Yeah, I'd say I don't quite understand the question. I think the ducks.
He's talking to a Southern lawyer, not you.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm kidding. I don't know. It could be. It really could be either of you. But I think he means like the chilled back thing.
It's a problem with 2 Steves on the panel.
Yeah.
Which Steve are you talking to?
Yes.
It is Southern law.
Clarify for us. It is Southern law. Okay.
Law.
Well, Steve Gosney doesn't look like he's too. You know, he's not overly worked up either. He's totally smooth up there. Look at him. He's laid back too.
That's true.
He gets passionate. No, he gets passionate though. Steve, Southern law has got a genteel vibe.
Yep.
You know, I did the whole statue monument thing. That was pure outrage of something. Yeah. Something like that.
I guess you could call each, we have the laid back Steves on the panel. I like that.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, yeah.
Branding.
Circling back around though, back to Joe's question, and I'm gonna pin Nate down. He did say which of these. He didn't give an option to say none. You have to pick one of the 5. So back to it. I stuck my head out and said I'd go with the jury. Again, I acknowledge all the problems, but if I had to pick one of the 5, I gave it the slightly most weight, in my opinion. So Nate, which of the 5 would you give the most weight to?
Damn,
so
you got to make me remember the 5.
The 5 things that something might have come in like since I brought it up. But I basically was asking, out of these 5, which would you give most credibility to? A polygraph, body language expert, a jury finding, a judge finding, or what was the 5th one? A police. Let's say police witness. Was it instead of police statement? Police testifying.
All right. Based on what you just told me, I would probably go with the judge. The reason why is because he's been presented the evidence. He's making the decision. It has to be based on the evidence, and he's independent. Number 2 would be jury, obviously, because I think juries are just a little less sophisticated than judges. But if you pin me down, I would go with the judge.
Which would be low? Which would be least? That's the other. What would be
a police statement would be least, because I've written those statements and I've read those statements, and a lot of times they are junk. That's why
the same answers.
Okay, I need to clip. No, Boozy's going to clip that out. Can you please clarify what you mean by that when you say you've written statements and sometimes they're junk? Can you clarify what?
Oh,
that means?
Let's not give Boozy another video.
Planning drugs on people. Blah blah blah. That was something.
So what I mean by the statements are junk is that they're poorly written. They're usually done. Remember, usually we're getting these statements right at the beginning of stuff, so the evidence isn't really all clear. And sometimes we make conclusions that aren't based on reality. So sometimes, which is unfortunate because we're human beings. So we'll say, A plus B equals C, and you're like, well, hold on, B didn't actually happen. So that's why. So police statements, especially at the beginning of an investigation, are usually unreliable. But anybody who's gone to court and been in the justice system, they'll tell you the police statements and stuff, you're not to be relied upon, or to be relied upon just as any other witness statement. So I'm not saying anything that's different. It's just, it's just that I wouldn't rely on them, because I know even in court, they tell you it's best not to rely on them.
And I think one edge to the judge over a jury in terms of fact finding is the judge not only gets to consider the evidence that's admitted, but she can also think about the evidence that wasn't admitted. And they're humans too, right? So that they get to know everything, whatever they actually consider or say they consider or not. They get the full picture of all of those options, and the jury only hears what the judge decides they can hear.
Oh yeah.
What do you think,
Gosney?
Yeah, I think I agree with Nate on this. I put the reason I put the judge is because the judge's factual findings, they're kind of constrained by what they can make a finding of and what they can say, okay, this is the fact. And usually they tend to be more analytical. So if there was a judicial finding, I would probably go with that one as the top one. But of course, I'm always questioning judicial findings in the appellate context, saying,
right,
there's no factual basis for your finding of fact, right? I have that actually orally argument coming up on June 15th. I'm going to be making that very argument that there was a violation of probation and there was zero evidence that was found violation. One of the violations had no testimony to back up the finding. So I qualify all of those. Being a lawyer and you have to question all of those things. But if you had to put them on a reliability, I'd agree with Nate's rankings.
Okay, I wish Robert Barnes was here. I have a feeling that because what is it? He does not think very highly of judges at all.
Well, I don't either. But you're asking me to rank.
No, you're right. You're right. Okay, so I'm going to go to Chandler.
I actually completely agree with Nate. My impulse is that I would trust the finding of a court, the finding of a judge, before a jury. I would definitely give the least weight to a police investigation.
Yeah, I personally would put jury finding much lower than you guys would. I have no faith that a jury is gonna. I have almost no faith. I would put probably. Yeah, there's no question in my mind that a judge's finding is probably the most reliable. I probably would put body language second behind it, and that's part of the reason I asked this question is because I would rank body language expert over a polygraph. I would rank them over police testimony. Mm-hmm. I would rank them over.
Really, I put body language at the bottom.
It depends on who it is. This is the problem. You're both right. It depends on who you're talking about. Again, even the polygrapher, like Steve, you mentioned the training, blah, blah, blah. I would argue that a proper polygrapher could do it without the machine.
That's exactly right. No, I know what my friend's done, and I know we've had long discussions about it, and I wouldn't want to go toe to toe with him. And I think I'm pretty sharp and I can get on my toes, but it's like if you're in an engagement with this guy, you are losing. And it's because of the skill and the training and the technique that they use. It's not the machine. It's the skill of the operator. It's the skill of the question.
But aren't they engaging in body language when they're using that skill?
No, it's a long. Yes. It's a long. Well,
no, but I mean, look, they're not.
They're not relying on the machine. Are they not interpreting the person's body language to help them reach their conclusion?
Well, we do that naturally. Everybody interprets something. You go, oh, they seem a little sensitive on this, and you keep talking or asking a question.
No,
so, but there is methodology
that is a fair
to it.
point. Right.
Well, I
so
guess
like reading the body language changes.
I don't have anything. No. I don't have anything to hide here, right? I'm a defense lawyer, so I can tell you that it's always the same. What they do is they go through it and you get whatever the machine says, whatever the checks. It's like, see right here, there's something you're leaving out. You aren't being completely truthful. And then the person says, where do you mean? Where's that? See right? Well, is there something you haven't told me that you're left with? And they go, well, let me think. And I mean, it's like, I've seen this over and over and over again. It's nobody ever says, oh, well, you're completely honest. That never happens. Nobody. It's a machine to keep you talking to the cop.
Well, I have something about polygraphs that I actually wanted to ask Nate, because I made friends with a cop. And sorry if I'm stepping on anybody's toes, if there was something else anybody wanted to say.
No, go for it.
Shall I go forward? I have this friend who's a police officer in Arizona, and he told me something that I didn't really know about polygraphs, which is that apparently when you are hired to, work on a police force, you are given polygraphs as part of your hiring process, and they will grade you and ask you very personal questions, like, have you ever committed bestiality, for example? Like, that's standard in an interview for hiring.
That's not personal. That's just gross. That's
the problem.
I guess sensitive might be a better word.
Okay.
I mean, I was surprised because I didn't know that was part of the hiring process for police officers. And apparently,
I don't think it can be for state. I think it only federal. I believe it's illegal for hiring practices for state. No,
this guy was a state cop. He's a state cop.
Yes, I went through one, and a couple of friends of mine who went on a couple of police forces have gone through them. Yeah, they make you go through polygraphs.
But I know employers can't do it. There's a question of whether government can do it, but employers cannot do it. It is actually against the law. There's a congressional act that was passed against the. So please look it up. I'm not trying to be a pain.
The way they do it, if anybody wants to become an officer, I don't know how they do it now, because again, we're talking about 15, 20 years ago for me. But the way they did it back then is that they gave you both the psychological exam and the polygraph. So, and the questions were always the same. So what they do is they're trying to catch you in a lie. So some of the questions would be something like, did you get mostly A's in school? And you'll say no. Did you get mostly B's in school? You'll say no. Then they'll say, did you consider yourself a good student? And if you say yes, but how could a good student not get, if you don't get mostly A's or mostly B's, how do you consider yourself a good student? So that's kind of the way they tried to mirror the questions. So what they would do, like questions I was asked was, did you ever use drugs before? Did you ever smoke weed before? Did you ever use cocaine before? And they'll ask you those first. They'll have to give you they'll give you something to write it down. So here's the questions, you'll answer it. Then you go to in front of a psychiatrist. I'm a psychologist. Then you'll talk about your answers, and then they'll give you a polygraph. And if you're consistent all the way through, then you're good. So a lot of times, people would fail on the polygraph if you find that you're trying to be deceptive. One of my friends actually didn't make it because actually for me, I spent maybe an extra half an hour with the psychologist, because one of the questions said, did you love your mother? It didn't say, do you love your mother? It said, did you love your mother, in the past tense. So I answered the question no, because my mother was still alive. And they were like, you're the only effing guy that answered that question wrong, right? So why did you answer the question? Because I actually read it. But we had to now spend a whole time about my relationship with my parents and whether I was, a maniac or whatever. But I'm like, I just read the question. My mother's still alive. But yes, so when it comes to polygraphs, they do that because they want to see. It's more about being consistent rather than telling the truth or not, because that's what they're trying to catch you. If you answer something, again, it's like a 3 or 4 day process. So day one, they'll ask you a question, and you should be answering the same on day 3.
Yeah, my friend is very against this whole practice of polygraphing in terms of, the hiring process. And especially because he told me, the interviewers changed. Like, you can answer the same questions the same way, but he moved to a different department, answered all the questions the same exact way. But because the polygrapher was very biased, he had a much higher rate of, bringing up, false answers. And that was not really consistent necessarily with the previous findings. So I mean, he's opened my eyes to this really interesting campaign to stop doing that as part of the hiring process for police. And I think it's really interesting because you have state workers' rights. It's because there are different government interests. It's just a question of is that lawful? Should it be lawful?
No, it's horrible.
Yeah.
There are people who want to be. Here's an example of that, because, like I said, I interviewed Doug Williams. Not a pleasant dude, by the way. Hardest interview I ever had.
Doug Williams. Who is Doug Williams?
He is the guy who testified in front of Congress that got it to be illegal for employers to do this. But
he was a quarterback of the Redskins, right?
Something like that. Anyway, essentially, you have people who are, as an example, a nuclear scientist. And the only job you can get, you go through all this education, your PhD and everything else, you got to work for the Department of Energy or nothing. You fail a polygraph, even though it's a BS test. and you have no career. And this is the argument that people are making here, is that you're relying on a disproven method. It is scientifically not only disproven, but trashed. It is completely trashed. It is pseudoscience. Now, body language, I always say, is pseudoscience. So people always go, that's a pseudoscience. Yes, I do. I know it's a pseudoscience. Same way that I know that cooking is an art and baking is a science. I call body language an art, and polygraph falls into that. It is not a science. It has been disproven up and down. It is literally illegal because of that. But why is it illegal for all the corporations to do it, for standard companies to do it? But no, the government, they can do it. So your CIA people, your FBI people, etc., you're going to rely on a bullshit method to vet your employees when it's already disproven. Doesn't anybody else find that to be troubling?
I do find it troubling, but it's kind of like I'm kind of 50-50 on this, because I've seen some bad officers. So I do want to for them to go through a robust process, but then I want them to go through a robust process that's accurate. So maybe the polygraph, you're right. Maybe it may be too much, but again, from my understanding, the polygraph was used in conjunction with a whole bunch of different, like it wasn't, you fail a polygraph, you don't have the job. It was kind of like, here's a whole body of evidence, your psychological exam. You're speaking to a psychiatrist. And then, if you failed through all that, then you couldn't become. But if there are departments that are doing it solely on the polygraph, I think that's a little much. And I think that's wrong.
By the way, I was trying to do a poll for Joe's thing. Somebody suggested it. There's a limit of 4 options, so it's kind of thrown out.
Leave out the police one.
Okay.
And put the rest of them in there. So I don't pick one to leave out, but I would leave out the police one.
Okay, so I'll do court, jury, body language, polygraphy. So
yeah, I think that's how I would do it.
All right. Well, since it's Joe, it's in the spirit of Joe. There you go. That's the poll. Anybody else want to argue with me on that? I mean, please do. This is a debate. I feel very strongly about this position. I think the polygraph is garbage. I think it is being used like a rubber hose. I totally agree with him on that front. And there are many, many other ways.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not a big fan of polygraphy.
I'm willing to bet you that the credence that's put on that they failed the polygraph is significant enough to outweigh, even though they did great on other things.
Yeah, it's possible.
All right.
Well, okay, that was nice talking to you.
You shut down the conversation.
Well, there's our cul-de-sac right there. Let's go back. Turn around.
All right. God. Next to Nova, waterboarding is the most accurate. No.
It can be exciting.
Have you guys ever watched that clip of the Mad Dog when he was like, he didn't care about waterboarding, it's not torture. So then he went and got waterboarded, and then his whole perspective on waterboarding changed.
Yeah, but you know what? It's different people. I think Tim Kennedy just sat there and let them waterboard him for like 20 minutes or so. So I mean, there is
Steven Crowder did that too. Steven Crowder did it.
Yeah, a Muhammad
waterboarding Christmas special or something.
I think Muhammad Atta, one of the 9/11 people, apparently had zero effect. I think he was waterboarded like hundreds of times or something. He does sign it. So again, it's a tool. And there's problems with that tool, especially because any kind of torture, well, they're going to tell you what you want to hear to make the torture stop, and it's not necessarily the truth.
Well, I mean, the Geneva Convention is the problem, essentially. But I think that what I understand is it's the threat of torture that is supposed to be useful. The actual torture itself is where you get into territory where you get false confessions, that sort of thing.
Yeah, because you just want it to stop, and that's again if you take the interview and interrogation course, that's the number one thing they tell you. If you put too much pressure on somebody, they're not going to tell you the truth. They're just going to tell you whatever you need. They need to tell you to get out of that situation. It may be the truth or not.
Right, and some personalities are highly susceptible to wanting to be cooperative, wanting to please the police. People who are like, I believe there was a case. There was that girl who killed her baby. Brooke Schuyler Richardson, and they diagnosed her with dependent personality disorder and said that she gave this false confession to something because she wanted to please the officers because of this disorder that she had. So it depends on the personality.
That's actually a very common. It's a much more common thing than people realize is false confessions. The most difficult case of my career was a false confession case, And people don't realize how people that are weak-minded and are willing to please, and the high in the agreeableness factor, they will falsely confess. They will falsely confess things, and people have real trouble understanding that, and especially giving mild coercion on the part of law enforcement. They will give them what they want. And so it's one of the highest risk factors. It's one of the main reasons that people get falsely convicted.
Isn't it also true, especially if they were inebriated at the time, or there might have been any question of their condition? Like, if something happened in a bar and they were drinking and maybe even a little bit drunk, they don't believe they did it, but then they were drunk. So how can they be sure? So let's say they're agreeable and they were drunk at the time too. So it starts to become
right. And so then they think, well, is it possible? And the thing, the mind is a very strange thing, and memory is a very strange thing. And what will happen is that people will actually create memories. They will create memories from nothing, from whole cloth, by implantation of memories by the police. They'll say, I remember this case. It's a nightmare of a case that I had to deal with. And the police were saying, and the person was saying, I don't remember that. I don't remember that. And they said, that's not an acceptable answer. You remember walking, you remember driving. And she's like, but I don't remember. And then they were saying, you remember the sound, and they're putting these thoughts in this woman's mind. And she was low IQ and very agreeable. And then she ends up writing a confession to a case. She confesses to the wrong way. She does, because the police didn't understand the crime scene. So she echoes the police officers in the confession, which was a wrong version of events. It was quite an amazing thing to watch.
And thank God, by the way, thank God she confessed it wrong.
Well, no, she got convicted.
No, but I'm guessing you got it overturned at some point, right? Or,
well, this is very sad. It was overturned on appeal for Brady violations and all kinds of prosecutorial misconduct. By the time we got it to the second trial, our client had given up on us. We were willing to fight, but she had surrendered because she was agreeable and she didn't want to fight anymore. And she was worn out, and the system beat her, and she pled and got 10 years in prison for a crime she did not do. Wow, and it's the most painful case of my career. And it was a horrific abuse of police power and prosecutorial power. But it's because the jury is that they're thinking, well, she confessed to it, right? Of course she did it. Well, no. I mean, there's reason. We had a great expert on. In fact, I should get him. That's another forensic guy I should tap into for my forensic series on Rumble, because we had a great expert on false convictions, and he used this case as an example of all the things you should not to do in a interrogation. You should have a holdback list. You should not feed. You shouldn't. There's a lot of things that are controls on that. Anyway.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't realize how easy it is to get somebody to confess to things that they did not do. It is extremely easy, people. And I know people are going to be like, it won't be me, it won't be me, until you're in that room and you got cops saying, hey, you can do 5 years or you can go home right now if you tell me what I want to know. And you know what? People start looking around and say, hey, I want to go home. So I'm going to say whatever you want me to say. I know it sounds crazy, but it is really that simple.
Oh, yeah. There was a case that I remember watching on 2020. It was something that happened in Illinois, and it was a case where they got a father to confess to murdering his 3-year-old daughter when there was proof that there was a, convicted sex offender who had actually committed the crime. And they released him. They dropped the charges, but he was interrogated, and they put him in jail. And they got him to confess to something that he had absolutely no involvement in. It was sickening.
Yeah, I think there's a series of programs. I'll have to find them again. But literally, there was like a TV series, or it might have been Netflix, like 4 or 5 just episodes, nothing but that. False.
I think that was Netflix. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, I want to ask you guys, have you guys talked about BLM spending the $60 million in 2 years?
We were waiting for you, Nate.
I think it's awesome.
Late.
It's
That's
awesome.
crazy.
Why Nate specifically?
Because he knows everything.
Because he just did a video on it.
Eric knows I was doing a video on it.
You were doing a video on it?
Joe, you were just talking about BLM yesterday.
I was.
Yeah, we were, because we were talking about the trans thing and that, Amnesty
All right,
International.
never mind, Nate. Joe, go ahead and talk.
I want to hear from Nate.
I want to hear. Look, if he's been covering it, I definitely want to hear about the 60 million. Sure.
Oh, all right. So for those of you who don't know, BLM's been around since 2013. They made no money. So we went and pulled up all their old tax returns. 2019, they literally had a zeroed out return. They made no money. They had nothing. The next year in 2020, because of white guilt, this is what the BLM people said. They called it white guilt. They got $90 million within that year. So now you go from having absolutely no money to $90 million. And what did they do? Well, the person who was running BLM hired her brother as security chief, paid him $1.6 million, hired her baby father, and he got $2 million, hired her mother, her sister, bought property. They did everything, right? The whole family is getting millions of dollars from BLM donations. And then she resigned. So now BLM, after 2 years, remember they spent 7 years, essentially 7 years, made no money. In 2 years, they've now spent $60 million on the verge of bankruptcy. They have a third of the money left, but a lot of it's already has already been essentially paying other things. Come to find out, when you go through their tax returns, they've also paid off some of the people's parents, some of the people who have been killed. You see their parents and foundations. Like there was one for Mike Brown. There's like $1 million there, $1 million for this one, $1 million. So everybody's hands have been being greased based on this money. So now people are trying to say, well, not only what happened to the money, but then whether these people should be in jail, because this money was supposed to go to help the cause, but it seems like it went to the people who are running it, families' pockets. So now what do you do?
They'll never go to jail.
No, of course.
Because no prosecutor wants to be the DA who's prosecuting Black Lives Matter. So the reality is they're never going to go to jail. And even though, then what Chandler is referencing is actually what was the tweet that you were talking about with respect to trans rights are human rights? What was that?
So Amnesty International, who I previously respected I mean, when I was in high school, I used to write letters to Congress. We had an Amnesty International club, and I really believed in the organization as a nonprofit. And so they tweeted out this thing that was just like, trans rights are human rights, like just as a reminder. And my response to that was, I don't really understand this talking point, because trans people are obviously human beings. Is that being called into question?
Right. And that
was my response.
I responded to that because I thought you were making a great point. I responded to that they're trying to make that the new Black Lives Matter slogan. That's essentially, and the whole thing with Black Lives Matter is, those are three words which, when you look at them together in their simple meaning, it's obviously true. I mean, you're an idiot, you're a crazy person if you think that Black lives don't matter. So you can't argue with it because it's facially true, but the implication of it was what's purposeful, because you don't need to say it. It's the stupidest thing in the world. Why would anyone have to say it? You don't have to say that the sky is blue, and you don't have to say Black Lives Matter. These are all equally obvious. The only reason you make the statement, though, is so that you can actually put a group on top of others and say that they merit greater status than someone else. And that's why they got so bothered by the response of All Lives Matter, because you're taking away that status. But you can't really argue with the initial statement without looking like a lunatic racist. So it was a very artful phrase, which they did clearly use for a grift to try and just enrich the owners without helping any of the people who 99% of all contributors were trying to help. All the victims of police brutality or George Floyd's family or whoever, going back to Michael Brown. And that's this whole trans rights is human rights. I don't think it's going to take off nearly the same way, because the phrase trans rights is not as clear what it means.
That's a very good point.
It's an amorphous term.
Even human rights is sort of a vague, nebulous thing.
Yeah.
Both those things are kind of like, well, what are we talking about?
Since I have all you lawyers here, I got to switch from Black Lives Matter, because this is a case that I just saw and I started covering. I wanted to get you guys' opinion on it. So Massachusetts, there's a woman who's suing under federal law. So she was in high school. She was the top female sprinter in the country. And she was in Massachusetts. So Massachusetts came up with this policy of, hey, we're going to let anybody, if you identify as a woman, you can run with the women. So there were a whole bunch of guys who started running with the women, and they killed them, right? They were number one. So she actually she wasn't able to get on the podium, so she lost like scholarships and everything because they were like the top 4. You had to be in the top 3, but now since the top 3 were men, and she was like in the 4th best woman because these other men were up there. But anyway, so now she's filed a lawsuit claiming discrimination, saying that the fact that they allowed men to compete with women violates Title IX because they have to have equal thing for both men and women. Now the Second Circuit first sent it back, but now she's going up and she's hoping to go to the Supreme Court. So I thought this was fascinating, the way that they were coming at it, because the way they're coming at it is saying that, hey, because Title IX says you have to have equal women in men's sports, by allowing men now to compete with women, you've essentially made Title IX useless.
Well, that's why they're fighting so hard on the definition of what is a man and what is a woman. That's exactly why I think they're equivocating and fighting it. And you even have a Supreme Court justice who couldn't determine what a woman is, because as soon as you acknowledge biology, her case has a ton of merit, right?
I think her case is good now too, because she's right? The Title IX was specifically to allow the two genders to have equal representation, especially in sports and things of that nature. But now if you essentially kill that and just say, allow men to compete in the women's category and win all these scholarships, then you are infringing on the women inherently in those categories. So it's interesting, but I don't know if they're going to be successful, but I think it's a fascinating argument.
And by the way, I want to bring this chat up because I'm waiting for everybody goes right to this. Where do you put the hermaphrodites or intersex? Well, when one of them is affected and sues, we'll address that point.
Mm-hmm.
But until that point, I'm going to ignore it.
Which is how the law tends to deal with it. It's like we're going to deal with the case in front of us and not try and deal with hypotheticals.
And it's also like 0.1% or a very small percentage. 99.9% of people are XX or XY, and so that's the general rule. So if we apply that general rule into sex, and there's this dichotomy between gender and sex. Okay, well, I'm talking about XXXY. What are you talking about, right?
Anomalies. Anomalies that are exceptions to the rule, especially when, and it's not really like a set of each, because sometimes you have you can't tell, but there are internal testes, but anyway, sorry.
But again, that would be a claim. And I think that any reasonable minded person could look at that particular case and say, I believe there was the Olympian who has an excessive amount of testosterone for a woman. And she was on that point. And I think she has a legitimate argument because she was biologically produced as a woman. There's no chemicals, no modern science or anything else that's making an adjustment in her. I think that a lot of people can feel sympathy and support
the whole
claims.
XXY question is a red herring, because
I agree.
That's not, and here's how you know it, because there were XXY people 100 years ago also.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have, the whole question is if someone changes into something, does that now make them this new thing that they're purporting to change, that they're purporting to change into, as opposed to if someone is born with a duality.
But how do you change? And the thing is that if you find, as far as forensic sciences, and we're going to have a DNA expert on tonight on my Rumble channel, if you find a piece of a finger, a piece of skin, a globule of cellular matter left over from somebody, they can take that and DNA test it. And what are they going to say? This was a male, and they can even identify the individual based on genetic. Right. So, to say, well, because it's in every cell of your body, every cell, the science can't change the genetic makeup of every cell in your body.
It's alchemy. It's really alchemy. It's like we're going to change lead into gold. We're going to change XY into XX.
It's Island of Dr. Moreau.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or else you could look at it as Frankenstein, that they're just going to cut pieces off, slap pieces on, and just start saying. And again, this is not to attack people who actually engage in it. I think that we have a social contagion in this country, and this social contagion is being pushed by powerful people who have a vested financial interest. I mean, that's one of the things they were covering in the movie that I was watching last night.
And the medical, the one guy that was talking about the dollar amounts.
Scott.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If the medical sees you as an individual, they don't see you as an individual. They see you as a bunch of price tags.
$1.6 million.
That they can all of a sudden pluck from your body and perform actions and bill insurance companies, and give you drugs that's produced. I mean, it's like there is big economic interest to push people into these categories.
It says, and I just want to point out, last night I was bashing Twitter for doing everything they could to suppress that movie, because what happened was, in case you're not on Twitter, well, in that case, congratulations to you. First of all, you're probably far more advanced than I and anyone and the rest of us who found ourselves there. But the Daily Wire put out on Twitter the movie by Matt Walsh, which was What Is a Woman, and they were supposed to have this whole thing in concert together with Twitter. And after Twitter reviewed the movie, not only did they cancel a planned event, but they tried suppressing it by making it not non-retweetable, and they were just trying to do everything they could to silence the sharing of that tweet and the movie through Twitter. And this morning, Elon Musk actually must have overturned it himself.
Well, he did. There's more to it, though. Because
so
Elon Musk said that we're not enforcing the policies correctly. Misgendering is not technically against. Somebody's booming really badly. I think that might be you, Chandler. Are you?
No, I think it's me. No, we have a thunderstorm in the area.
Oh, okay.
I'll mute myself. We'll see if it gets fixed. Sorry.
That wasn't you.
Anyway. It was he said Elon Musk responded that they're making the wrong decision at Twitter. This is all yesterday, that misgendering is not illegal on Twitter. It's impolite. He doesn't personally do it, but it's impolite and there's no reason for it to be restricted. It's not against the law, blah, blah, blah. Then all the suppression still happened anyway. And then the head of trust and safety resigned in the middle of you didn't know about all that. Yes.
No.
So there was a battle going on in Twitter, and the person who took over for Noel Roth quit last night around 9 o'clock Eastern, while this was going on, and all of a sudden the restrictions were taken off. So there's a couple articles out there. It hasn't been conclusively proven, but the timing is so incredible that
but Elon actually went so far as to not only take it off, but to give it the biggest boost possible, which was retweeting it and saying everyone should watch this movie.
Well, he should have, because he needs to clean his house. I mean, I'm getting tired.
It was a good job by him.
Yeah,
it was you know what? I can tip my cap in that it was a good job in curing something that Twitter did wrong. That's as good a job as Twitter can do, is Elon himself promoting the movie, retweeting it, and saying everyone should watch this. And he essentially stressed what I stressed, which is it's not a reason to bash. You're not bashing people who are trans themselves, but everyone should understand what's happening. That's the whole
Matt Walsh just goes in and asks questions. He doesn't really say anything. He doesn't really give his opinion. And that's the genius thing about it. That's why it's such a powerful documentary. It's so well done. He doesn't insert his own ideology. He's a great commentator. He has a lot to say on the subject, but he doesn't do it in the documentary. He just asks people to answer this question and points out, through the absurdity of their own tripping over their words, how idiotic the entire thing is. And that's why I really respect him. I don't agree with everything he says, but I think that he's a really strong and powerful commentator. And that's why I like this documentary, because he doesn't center himself. He makes it all about everybody else, all of their perspectives, and, shows where we've come to as a society, that we now cannot define a woman, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Well, and Joe made a great point too on his show last night, and that is that this is really a first world problem, and it's, I think the movie makes that point by going to the African African tribe in Nairobi. It's like they're like, what are you talking about, right? I mean, this is what the women, this is the men, and that's tribal society, which is humanity has been for millions of years. This whole contagion is a first world problem where people are navel gazing and thinking about, what am I? And also another revelation that Joe had last night. I did watch it last night. I watched the whole thing. Was when you were shocked, because it used to be, when I was growing up, a Gen Xer, there was the kids that were kind of outcasts, and there were sort of the nerds, or the goths, or whatever. They would have a category, and they're looking for identity. And part of being a teenager is being clumsy and goofy and out of your skin and not having an identity. So people are seeking identities. And so I'm going to become this. And now we've disconnected these people from their community, and we're connecting them instead into this whole internet world that's telling them we have an identity for you. And people are clothing themselves in these identities. But the problem is that these identities have permanent and long-term physical and psychological consequences. It's a very powerful and destructive force that's being pushed by our society into these kids that are vulnerable and are just confused and trying to learn their way forward.
And the epiphany that I had last night was that, the parents of teenagers the parents themselves were teenagers in the 90s, and pop culture in the 90s, if you're too young to remember it, was all about, I am a loser. I'm a social outcast. It was American Idiot. It was American Reject. It was Beck. It was Green Day.
Scientologist.
It was Reality Bites, and it was started really with Breakfast Club, which was a breakaway from the 80s. The 80s was all about American exceptionalism. It was Rocky, and it was overcoming Drago. But when you got to the 90s, it started, and Nirvana and pop culture shifted, where it's like, no, we don't believe we're going to be great. We think we're losers, and we're going to bask in the fact that we are losers and social outcasts, and find our social standing in the recognition that we are social outcasts. That's what Nirvana really sold, and even the whole dress style was like a much more dressed down rather than the popping out with bright colors. It was dressed down, kind of basking in the fact that you're a loser and you're a social outcast.
Well,
and
Joe,
through that you gain social status.
It was also a reflection of the punk movement that took place in the 70s. So we've got a back and forth pendulum to it. The punk was a response to too much excessive playing and music that was too complex, etc. So you got stripped down. So a lot of this is a yin and yang that kind of goes through.
My point is, these those people who were teens in the 90s, I think they can relate to the social outcast feeling. A lot of them probably can relate to the social outcast feeling that your typical trans kid who's been infected with social contagion, and be like, yeah, okay, I can understand you finding your social status in the world by embracing the fact that you are a bit of an outcast, and we're going to raise you up for that recognition, because it's a reflection of what they themselves were doing when they were teens. That was the point that I was trying to make. That was the epiphany that I had yesterday, which I hadn't really realized.
Well, there's another thing too,
where these parents may be coming from.
Another difference, because Joe doesn't like to claim it, but he's Gen X, just like I am. We're born within like 2 weeks of each other. And
that's true.
So
happy birthday, bro.
Well, you too. Yours is coming up.
That's true.
Anyway, another problem is we're giving too much credence to people who really haven't earned it yet. And what I mean is, and I'm not trying to say to be completely cruel, but Joe, you and I grew up, and it was sit down, shut up, go ahead, play your silly games, do whatever. We're not going to actually believe that you're Superman and running off the roof. We're not actually going to believe that. We're going to indulge you to a point, but we know you're being silly. We're going to tell you you're being silly, and get over it. Now, I'm not trying to say that we need to suppress people's values or anything, but there is a degree of skepticism that we faced growing up, and I'm pretty sure the two Steves as well probably faced a little bit of that, yeah, come back to me when you know something, aspect of growing up. And we probably need just a little touch of that instead of Johnny said it, and we have to enable Johnny because Johnny is so smart and he'll feel so bad if he doesn't get his way. And let's get him a participation trophy. And it does go to that. I'm sorry.
Well, Eric, I think what you're saying, take it back to what Joe said and then put it with what Steve said, because what Joe is saying makes sense. But where it becomes even worse, in my opinion, is if you put it with what Steve said, is there's now a medical industry, or more than just medical, that can monetize this, and there's also an ideological movement that is going after these kids too, and there's so much money in it. I mean, I certainly see it in the medical field in this state, North Carolina. It is pervasive. They are all over it, and it's encouraged to get the kids now and to have them view themselves that way. And it's lifelong money and beach houses and bonuses and things like that. So to me, there's more ability to make it even worse maybe than there was in the past.
I have a question for the lawyers. And hi, Runkle. Do you think that in 10 years' time there will be? Because I'm perceiving this sort of. Joe, you were talking last night. I thought you made a really good point. How I see that there's going to be a reckoning with all these kids and the parents, and I feel like class action suits, medical malpractice suits are on their way in about a decade or so. What do you think?
Sackler on steroids.
I'm wondering how
that is what I said. I stand behind that. I don't know. Look, I don't know if it's going to be like 7 years, 10 years, 15 years. The reckoning has to come. It has to come. But at the same point, the sad thing is there's no money that can rectify it.
No, yeah, I mean, we got to stop it because, I totally agree with you on that, Joe. I mean, it's like, oh, great, so you can win a lot of money, but you're physically deformed.
We have a bunch of mutilated kids who are now in their 20s and their 30s who are sterile, who can't have children, who are physically mutilated
and miserable
and making the life unhappy. And now they're going to say, you're going to have a good lawsuit. I mean, money can't bring that back. That is such a personal thing. And this whole thing is an attack on the most personal and individual thing on children. I can't think of anything that's more evil.
No, I agree with you. I bring up the lawsuit thing specifically because I'm thinking that, I know that I believe in Sweden and another country, they had these protocols where they were doing what America's doing right now, and then they rolled it back because they started to see this is problematic, and they have, strictures in place where, you have to be experiencing, a diagnosis of gender dysphoria for a certain number of years. You have to live as the other gender, blah, blah, blah. You have to reach a specific age.
It's difficult, very difficult.
We know they're performing surgeries on minors, and so what I'm thinking is, could a lawsuit potentially, put a stopgap or cause some kind of systemic change so that the medical industry can, so that it can be called out that this is obviously, doctors are getting kickbacks. This is about making money. Could it possibly put some strictures in place that could
I hope
make
it happens now,
easier?
though, because I'm concerned about future victims. I mean, I'm not against a lawsuit. It's just, I want it stopped. I don't want it to be like, oh, now there's 50,000 victims that can sue versus hundreds. It's so horrific and frightening to me that I think, great, sue, do whatever you have to, but please stop it. Stop the potential harm going to people, specifically children who are not able to.
Well, Florida's doing it. Tennessee is doing it. You have some states that are on it and ahead of it. But then you have California, which, you can take, there's that father who he got into this divorce situation. The mother was transing the kid. The kid was taken to California, and they were able to do medical procedures on this child against the wishes of the father, because California is a sanctuary state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that is a huge, so it's like we have different states kind of making this happen. I'm wondering, could something be big enough to make a change at a federal level, and what would that entail? What do we need in order to make that happen?
I think the in terms of taking a kid in a sanctuary state and stuff like that, with the Federal Preventing Parental Kidnapping Act, that those laws obviously violate that. When that percolates up, they'll be struck down. But they don't care. They're passing them now. They'll get their cases and things like that. They'll be able to say, look, we'll protect these kids to get this surgery here. I think, Chandler, for what you're saying, it'll take a broader thing, which I think is probably what you mean to start to curb this. But I don't see the real willpower in it at this local level here in North Carolina. There are very vocal people trying to stop it from happening to kids, but there is also a lot of momentum for it in the hospitals, in the various parts of the medical community, in the political spectrum, at least here, and in the school system. All of those things are oriented towards supporting this with a larger degree than
not only supporting, Steve, celebrating.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's Pride Month. So, we have to celebrate every form of diverse alternative lifestyle.
Well, are we going to, do we celebrate schizophrenia? I mean, I feel I deal with people in the mental illness area because we have to cover them in what they call Baker Acts here in Florida. And it's sad. I mean, people are trapped in their own minds when they're mentally ill. But are we going to make that? It's like, well, that's just their reality. And, no, we try to bring them out. We try to give them drugs and different, and try to bring them out from their schizophrenia into the real world so they can live a productive life. It's a tragic and horrible thing. The mind can trap you and enslave you, just like your history or just like a tyranny can. And so why should we celebrate it? It's like, well, let's just make it go away by making it happy. Let's call it not schizophrenia, but schizonormal. Right, and let's just call it something different and celebrate it. And
it's neurodivergent, or we'll have other terms for it. And we'll just
normativity, like heteronormativity.
Let's talk about adults. What is the alternative therapy?
Okay,
well, adults are different, I think.
Yeah, for adults, they actually did have therapy, Ian, I think, for a while. One, we will have to parse. I agree with everybody that adults are different, so they do have the option to do this as an adult. So are you with us that we take children off the table?
I think that here in Canada, there's pretty strict limits as to what can be done with children in terms of transition. I don't know about there are strict.
I mean, when you say that, okay, when you say that there's strict limits, I don't want to just disagree with you to be disagreeable, but in the movie yesterday, they had a guy from British Columbia who was saying that he was thrown in jail for misgendering his own daughter.
Have you read that case? That's
I want
not
a Canadian
the
on the
circumstance
panel
at all.
So how can you? So walk us through where you think there was an error there on that, Ian.
What that guy was doing was persistently harassing his kid and he was being pretty horrible to his kid, and he ended up getting an order not to do a variety of things, and he continued to breach that. He was jailed for breaching a court order. And so, this case has been widely misreported.
Okay, fine. I don't even know the name of the case. If you can give me a link or something, I'll be happy to go through it, because I'm actually very curious about this. Because what you're saying, just because there's a court order doesn't mean that the law itself isn't ridiculous in how it's encouraging the further spread of social contagion. So breaching the law doesn't make him immoral, or inherently doesn't mean that he's wrong from a morality perspective.
Right, it's like
he's wrong from a legal perspective.
The case law here in Canada is very clear that even if you get a court order that should never have been imposed, assuming it's not void from the outset for some reason, which most of them aren't, that's a very rare circumstance. The courts expect you to challenge that in court rather than just ignoring it, and they will jail you for breaching a court order. Like if I get let's say my neighbor calls up and says, "Hey, Runkle threatened me with a gun and whatever else," and I know that never happened. I have to go to court and challenge that order and say that never happened and contest that, rather than just going over there and being like, "Hey, buddy, what the hell," and talking to him in violation of that order.
But I can go to jail for violating that
order.
There's a moral question that is beyond that, that's based in natural law. Because, for example, there was a priest or a preacher up in Canada who was jailed because he was holding his church service. Oh, Joe, go ahead, church.
No. I'll wait for you to finish before I cut off.
Well, if you're ordered not to hold your mass anymore, do you not hold your mass because the state is greater than your God?
That's pretty much how the law says you should be doing it, is challenge that first.
They don't have a bill of rights that I recall in the same way.
Ian, we started this conversation by you saying that Canadian law is very strict about not transitioning children. And you're telling me that, well, that case there is different because he broke the law. But the reason the law basically enabled his daughter to start transitioning when she was 13 or so. So how?
My understanding is the extent of the transition.
Let me just finish my question, if I can, brother. Yeah. If I can, and that is, you're telling me that the law in Canada is very strict about stopping children from being able to transition, when the law here basically seems to me, and according to what you're saying, well, there was a court order which told him to stay away from the daughter. The reason that he's trying to interject is because he felt the law in Canada was promoting the transitioning of his daughter. So I'm not sure how the law that was issued in that court is consistent with what you're claiming the law in Canada to be with respect to stopping children from transitioning. So if you could explain that to me, that's what I'm really confused about.
The law restricts in terms of what can be done in terms of medical interventions, but not in terms of there is no aspect as to the law controlling what somebody says in terms of like, hey, this is how I express myself or whatever. And there shouldn't be, because a medical transition is different than somebody saying this is how I prefer to be addressed. But the issues with that father in terms of how he was addressed, like how he was dealing with his kids, went way beyond that and beyond the transition aspects at all. So you've got this guy who has a very contentious relationship with his kid, and a very contentious relationship that is, so like this is a family law dispute that goes well beyond any of that, and which he's sort of been marketing in this particular way. But when you actually look into it, it's like the kid doesn't want to have anything to do with him, and for a variety of reasons.
Okay.
So that's kind of the problem, is that this is a case that's so much more complicated and has been sold as one that's very simple. Just as you can't trust the media to report on Rittenhouse or, Depp or any of that, you should also be skeptical of this case and read the cases. That's
a fair point. I'm going to ask you factually from your understanding, though, and a couple of things. First of all, would you not consider chemical castration little different from physically cutting off body parts?
I mean, I'm not going to get into the chemical, like what each thing does. That's a medical question that's kind of beyond me.
But assuming it were chemical castration, would you consider that to be the same?
I mean, it really depends. I don't know sort of what you're describing here, because the drugs that are used for like sex offenders are different than the drugs that are being used here.
Are they?
They are. They're a different set of things because they're intended for different purposes. The things that are intended for sex offenders don't include, for instance, puberty blockers and that kind of thing. The question of reversibility and so forth is one I think we're going to have to address, and to determine consent and those kinds of questions and what's reasonable there. But we need to be sort of a little more cautious with how we deal with this.
From what I understand, they use Lupron for both sex offenders and children. So when you're saying that they're different, and I don't know enough about the science as to what they actually do to tell you that I'm definitively right. I'm just telling you that's certainly what was presented in Matt Walsh's movie, and he's claiming he didn't. Now, when the British the Canadian father was speaking in the movie, so he basically was making a claim that there were some chemicals that were being administered to his daughter, which is where he freaked out. They said we're going to start administering in the next hour or so, and that's when he started freaking out. So I don't know enough about the facts of that case. I first became alerted to that case through the movie last night, and I haven't done any follow-up on it yet. So it's very likely you know more about it than I do. But I'm still confused as to if they're allowing a chemical castration. To me, that seems, or even puberty blockers, which we don't know that they are. We don't know for certain that they are reversible, and there's certainly evidence to suggest that it likely may not be reversible. So, in that sense, to say that Canada stands in the way of this, to me, seems inconsistent with everything I've ever heard about Canada, with respect to this and several other issues where they seem to be far to the left of America, which many states in America do allow children to engage in transition.
This is going to be the worst thing. I mean, I needed to wrap up actually 5 minutes ago.
I'm sorry. I know. I'm sorry. I should have started this.
No, I have some super chats.
And Ian, I hope I didn't offend you. I wasn't trying to offend you.
I should just respond though before we move on. Otherwise, the chat's going to have entirely the wrong notion here. I mean, I am cautious about things where we're talking about irreversible, treatments and so forth, especially with children. It's a very difficult situation, and I'm very cautious to say what should be, should be allowed with children. But Canada has restricted both the use of puberty blockers as well as surgical processes. So the surgical processes, I know you have to be 18 for. In terms of the puberty blockers, I mean, I don't know the degree to which it's reversible, and if it's not reversible, we should be extremely cautious about allowing that. In terms of like what people decide they want to do, I think that's entirely a matter for the family, as opposed to because I believe government should stay out of like people's decisions about themselves. But I'm skeptical about government solving anything in these things. But I will say, I'll try to get you that case because it's a lot more complicated than it gets spun.
That's fair. Okay, let me go through the super chats really quickly. This one's from a while back. Most reliable form of interrogation we had was when I was working military intelligence. Was a big stack of money. Very true. Can be very effective. Jim Satala. The father who Chandler was speaking about was my friend Kevin Fox. He got $12 million, but the damage to him mentally never healed. He died 2 months ago, apparently in a car accident, sadly.
I'm so sorry to hear that, Jim.
I
was very moved by his story.
Let me see. Transgender issues were considered mental illnesses in the U.S. until 2019. Why have we changed our tune so quick? Good question, and that's still up in the air, still being disputed, I think.
No, the DSM-5 was basically it's come out. The DSM-4? It was part of the mental illness, and it was taken out basically by vote of committee because the organization was taken over by activists and leftists who decided to put that in there. So that's a DSM-5 issue.
All right, IWD. I remember seeing the Baker Act weaponized by parents during divorces and attempted by school admins to retaliate against dissenting students. Been a South Floridian since 2001. It's an evil law. Any law in any custody dispute, and I'm sure Rob of Law and Lumber would get in here, they get ugly, and all kinds of horrible things get slewn about for the purpose of winning that sometimes are not exactly accurate. Julio, we're going to wind up with a bunch of young adults with osteoporosis, and that's irreversible. Lupron for adult women to treat endometriosis.
Endometriosis. That's the one longitudinal study I've seen. Yeah.
Is very limited in length. Okay. And IWD. Lupron cuts the life expectancy of its users by as much as 15 years. If the state tried that with my kid, I'd take them and flee to Uganda or Dominica, where the alphabet soup is illegal. I think everybody agrees, mostly, I'm guessing, that anything on the kids is a problem. As far as adults go, I'm not necessarily going to support my loved one doing it, and I may try to talk them out of it. I may disagree with my friend, but that is ultimately their choice. It is their choice if they drink excessively and do things. It's their choice if they do drugs. It's their choice if they make a lifestyle choice to themselves that does not harm somebody else. I will be very sad. I will try to discourage them. I will try to be a friend, but they are an adult, and it is ultimately their choice. And
except that there's also something called the Hippocratic Oath. And so you have a whole medical industry that is actively encouraging and assisting to create these systems, right? If you come to me and say, will you assist me in harming myself? I will say to you, no, because it's morally wrong.
Right. Okay, well, that threw that wrench into it, but I was talking about them doing something themselves. So from that,
they're utilizing the medical industry, and then we have socialized medicine, so it's coming out of my pocketbook, and it's morally wrong.
I hate that argument about it's coming out of my pocketbook, because that gives the random person, just because they're a taxpayer, way too much influence on my life. Like, hey, I don't think you should have glasses because that's partially coming out of my pocketbook. I don't think you should smoke. I don't think you should skydive. I don't think you should any of this stuff. And I'm like,
well, there are some people who say that everything should be privatized and they should be paying. So anyway, continue next week, folks, because we just opened a huge can of worms. Let me see. Where can I find everybody? Starting with Steve.
Oh, I'm at stevegosney.com, and I'm on Rumble. I'll be having a DNA expert on my Rumble channel tonight at 8:00. So I've been going through a series of forensic sciences, including fingerprints, and I'm going to try to reach out and find my friend who was on false confessions, and I'm doing a series of forensic interviews and conversations so that we can learn more about these forensic sciences. And I had Chris Fabricant on yesterday, who is great. He's from the Innocence Project, talks about bite mark evidence and junk science. So do tune up. Go to stevegosney.com, get all your books there, and thank you all for watching and visiting.
Southern Law, Steve.
My channel is Southern Law, and I'm here at Woke County, where there are institutions encouraging minor children, very young, to believe they were born into the wrong bodies and they need drugs and surgery if they're ever going to be happy. And I hate that.
All right, Chandler.
You can follow me on Twitter, and you can subscribe to me on YouTube at the same username, which is at Remy, REMY_legal. I'm on Legal Vices every Thursday. We do the O.J. Simpson case. It's a lot of fun, and I'm also going to be doing various streams. The only stream I have planned right now is for Sarah Boone's interview. Next Wednesday, I believe I'm going to be doing with MLS Law. I'll update you if I have to change that, but that'll be really fun.
All right. And Ian, coming in late, but coming in hot.
Well, it's somebody has to, you can't just everybody be sitting around agreeing. But I'm at Runkle of the Bailey. Mostly right now I'm talking about how the government is screwing up in Canada on guns. Because they're doing some insane things. They're banning the transfer of handguns, which means that if you die with handguns, your kids can't even get them. It's crazy. So check that out. I'm gonna keep talking about that, although it may be a little slow because I'm right now having to do a factum to challenge the government on this. So I'm currently locked in court battles to fight them.
Good times. All right, now. Last but definitely not least, we always try to close out with Joe. He, states wherever he can find it, and he usually has some piece of wisdom or something he wants to share. And so we always leave with Joe for last. So Joe.
All right. So I am Joe Neerman, but everyone calls me Good Lawgic. You can find me on YouTube where I stream fairly regularly. I'm at goodlogic.locals.com. I'm on Rumble. I actually even have a Facebook page, all of them Good Lawgic. So yeah, I think that my takes sometimes people find to be somewhat hot, somewhat, or somewhat. I think the kids say based. So I think that they mean that as a compliment, either that or they mean that I'm an idiot. It's one of those things. What do I know? I'm just a boomer. But I do want to make this point. A lot of people look at me fighting with Ian. Let me tell you what I really think about Ian Runkle, okay?